structural reforms come under the national competence, the national area of responsibility, and not under the regional area of responsibility. So this 22 billion will somehow automatically be directed towards national governments. Therefore, a new approach needs to be adopted in order to make sure that the budget will not only reach central governments, but also local governments. Now, as I said, the Parliament tried to make the best out of these situations, but again, the conditions state by virtue of Article 2 of the Treaty of Lisbon, underlining that the beneficiaries, meaning cities, regions, or any other geographic entity, and no other direct beneficiary, Erasmus students or anyone else, cannot lose those funds, and it's not their fault. Therefore, the beneficiaries of all these funds, of all these programs, shouldn't be affected by such decisions. So we will see how that will be achieved. We need to face the situation as is. So, to conclude, that is the current situation. The European Council, in order to participate in an informal meeting in Bucharest, I have to say that the European Council for the first time invited the two key negotiators, me and Mr. Bricht, into an informal discussion, an informal debate which was rather interesting, and through which we understood that the European Council was divided in their opinions. There were 3 or 4 different opinions. I don't know how they will come up with an agreement.
I would like to remind you that at the beginning of the decade we had a 1.4 GDP percent budget. Now we are at 1.1% actually sharp. And 0.9 is the net money received. And in the framework of all those populist phenomena, you can see a budget that keeps shrinking. And that's 1% of all the wealth produced in Europe. So, in the 90s, our competences were totally different compared to what we have today. Back then, we had the Cohesion Fund. Erasmus had just begun back in the 90s. Erasmus was established in 1987. Research policy had also just been launched back then. Therefore, you understand how the situation was so different. And you know that all the things that are today a reality and we take for granted were not available back then, about the Erasmus and all the things we see. Competencies were far fewer. Therefore, like I said again, our budget keeps shrinking and shrinking. That's why there is a new treaty. We observe a general blockage. We can hardly go beyond 1% of GDP for our budget. That's a rather radical point of view, to my point of view, in a way. Well, actually, I haven't counted all the countries. We have other groups of countries that follow their leaders. They follow the pack. And there is a group of countries that is in favor of budget increase. However, they don't speak up rather fervently. They would like to have an increase of the budget, but they don't speak up. They hide behind other leaders. And then there is a series of countries that would like for the budget to increase. I'm talking about another 5 or 6 countries that want to achieve an increase of the European Union resources. Other countries that don't want to reduce or diminish other European policies, and it is through this council that there are the leaders, the countries that are leaders. Well, actually, they're not all of them leaders. Italy, for example, contrary to what the government narrates in the media, is in favor of a substantial increase to the budget. But there are a couple of leading countries that don't express their opinions, and they're just waiting for the example of the results and of them to open their cards and start playing. So we're all looking forward to the results of the European elections. Like I said, our council is not homogeneous, does not have a unanimous position. The problem, like I said before, is that opinions are divided. So on the one hand, we might have a portfolio that is lagging behind. We know that those delays are going to affect your commission as well. But I would like to say that for the time being at least, the Council decided that they're going to give out their opinion in fall. And fall begins late September and ends late December, like one of my colleagues say. So it's a rather vague option. They just said in the fall. Okay, we know that fall is a long time period in the European Union. Anyway, I'm saying that late November, early December, we will have an opinion. Why is that? Because the new European Parliament will take place, will undertake their mandate next July, maybe early October. They will start operating, they will start the various hearings with the commissioners. This will last until late October. Therefore, we won't have any specific meeting before October, so the European Parliament will not be ready to undertake full operation until November. I can share with you one principle of negotiation only. This will take place late October, mid-November, so the yes from the Parliament will come who knows when. Personally, my estimate is that this won't happen until mid-January, January 2020, if things turn out well, of course. So you understand that we will have problems with this particular aspect of the budget. Now, if the budgetary framework changes, actually, if the Council had the guts to tell no to the Parliament, what would happen to the regions? I don't want you to stress up. No. Because the current funding framework will extend. Therefore, you would have another amount from the budget that you receive on an annual basis. Therefore, let's hope that the same levels of commitments will stay in place. And in that way, we will be able to preserve those things. That's an option you could consider. Well, that's the first problem. The portfolio problem. Of course, with the European Union, you should always expect the unexpected. And we need to have a new funding framework or extend the previous financing framework. A second issue that we're faced with, it has to do with delays on behalf of the Parliament. To my point of view, that's a problem with the Commission as well. Because normally, the positive opinion should have been given back in 2017, but this position was never issued, or it was issued only 6 months later. And then they are just pushing the European Parliament because they were late anyway. So you understand that the European Parliament is the only body that is ready from day one. And why I'm saying all of this? Delays and deadlines set by the Council normally shouldn't have an impact on the basic rules. I'm talking about issues that have to do with cohesion programs, social funds. Normally, there should be no direct relation between those two. However, allow me to say this. In order to avoid having the Council doing what they like, I'm just trying to explain to you the rationale of the Council. The European Council decided to give all those figures, all the numbers of the Council to the various regulations. For example, for the Erasmus regulation, there is the Erasmus number that has been voted by the European Parliament. When it comes to the cohesion regulation, there is this or the other amount assigned. So, there is some consistency. And the debate on the institutional issues of the region has not been completed. On the one hand, yes, we are going to vote about the text in the first reading of the Parliament. So we do have a position of the Parliament, a position that will be heard after the European elections, so where the regulations procedure will begin. On the contrary, in the negotiations and consultation with the Council, nothing can be completed because we are waiting for the amounts, the numbers, the figures. We expect for that in order to be able to negotiate. And why is that? Because if we complete the procedure on the sectoral rules, then there will be no room for flexibility in the negotiations. Right now, the only thing that we can do in order to be flexible is to say that unless we have a positive opinion, we won't do anything. We won't say yes to anything else. That's what the European Parliament says. It's like blocking the legislative procedure ourselves. It's the only tool that we have in our hands in order to negotiate about the amounts. Because in the process of this financing tool, we can say no without any negotiation. Rather than being the dump of the group and saying that, yes, we're going to vote yes or no, then, instead of that, I believe that we rather abduct the various rules and we hold them in our hands until we see where this is going. So after fall, this very long fall that extends up to late December, so on the one hand, I realize that regions feel anxious about the future. However, at the same time, I will be frank and I will tell you, please don't be afraid, because this delays to our benefit, because this will extend the current financing framework. And secondly, in that way, we allow the Parliament to use the means and tools in order to work to your benefit. The European Parliament has the means, and those means are going to be used. Those policies are not simple. They're extremely necessary. So we will move forward, and we don't want to block the treaties. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking that long. If you have any questions, I'm here. However, I would like to say that this exercise with the Council for the next financing framework at 1% of the GDP, please think carefully. Think carefully and tell your government that's a radical reduction of money that should normally be received by the regions, and this will never increase. The Europe of solidarity is now becoming a Europe with safe borders, and let's hope that this will not be your choice for Europe of the future.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Thomas. Bien évidemment, on a...
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. Apparently, we have time to discuss, so of course, we are going to capitalize on your availability being here with us today. Now, I would like to give the floor to our guests. No, would you like, President, would you like to say something or mention anything? First of all, I would like to thank the MEP for being here with us. Thank you for your intervention. I'd like to congratulate you on behalf of all of us, because she was awarded by your peers as the top MEP with regards to budgetary issues. So we have an expert here who can enlighten us. First of all, I would like to say that there are some contradicting powers. What you say is that if there is a reduction of the overall budget, then the cohesion policy will be the first to be sacrificed. We need to stand our ground, to keep the levels of the overall budget and wage our fight in order to preserve cohesion policy and reinforce it. You also said that discussions will be relaunched early 2020, and you also said that we should not be reluctant, because what we want is to develop a strategy against inertia. Excuse me, a strategy of inertia, because the current strategy does not oppose our interests. Well, my advice would be not to channel your interests elsewhere. The question is how we can step in the process. Is there a vehicle that we could use? Well, actually, the Council could urge us by sending a proposal that has not been negotiated with the Parliament. And then the responsibility will be very heavy for the Parliament, and then they won't be able to say no. The situation is not easy. We need to veto that. It's not easy. It's not pleasant. I know, but I believe that if the Council of Europe proposal, or excuse me, says the Speaker, the European Council's proposal is not satisfactory, we need to veto that. Okay, yes, so we need to sit back and wait and see what happens after the European elections, because maybe we might have a European Parliament that will be fully in favor of a reduction of the budget and the scope of cohesion policy. Well, yes, we realize that this is critical. Thank you very much.
Governor, do you want to say something?
Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate the MEP for the well-structured presentation she made. She gave us the right dimension with regards to the cohesion policy. She clarified the priorities. All the priorities of the European Parliament, and she helped us understand that now everything is more complicated and sophisticated because we have the European elections ahead of us. So we know that this will play a decisive role for the continuation of this process. Therefore, she also brought forward another point of concern. Those European elections are a major point of attention. We are the ones that will encourage our fellow citizens to go and vote in order to have an outcome that will be based on what we want to achieve. Once more, thank you, MEP, because you offered us the foundation in order to discuss.
For Mrs. Thomas. Or comment? Non. Pas pour le moment, en tout cas. Après, sûrement. Donc, je remercie encore énormément.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us all this information. We wish you every success to your future endeavors. Thank you for your interest.
À tout ça. Alors, petite information technique. Maintenant, nous...
So, a slight technical detail. Right now, we are going to take a family photo. So please join us at the entrance for the family photo, and then we will have a 15-minute break. Thank you.
Allez voir un peu Saint-Martin parce que j'ai l'impression qu'elle est un peu vexée.
Ah, je vais les voir personnellement. Je suis entre...
Et le marteau, il en plus.
Voilà. Hier, je me suis fait remonter les bretelles parce que les interprètes ne voulaient pas rester. Donc,
ah bon, ils ne voulaient pas rester?
please take your seat. We start in a few minutes, waiting for people outside.
It's hard to get them back.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. Okay. Okay, I think that we can start, and the other people will come later. So, welcome to this second part of our General Assembly, which is more oriented and focused mainly on cohesion policy. This is quite important for us and of course for you, because as our colleagues and also Isabel Thomas, the President, and everybody yesterday said, we are in, and also Eleftherios, of course, we are in a crucial period and phase for us and for you, of course. So this seminar today is a sort of a follow-up of the cohesion session that we have organized yesterday. And the idea is to move today to more practical and also prospective views for the future. So we will try to do a specific exercise. On one end, we will try to focus on the current programming periods and also on the current implementation of the operational programs 2014-2020, and at the same time we will try also to discuss about the future. So in this respect we will have a discussion with some managing authorities, as I said, about the main success but also obstacles and problems that they incurred during the implementation of their operational programs. And at the same time, we will try also to discuss about the design, also the planning of the next programming period. As I said, this is a crucial period. Some people yesterday stressed the fact that European Commission asked the member state to prepare their program roadmaps for the next programming period, and the idea is to present these programming roadmaps by the end of June 2019. So this means that you are expected to work very quickly, because all the partnership agreements and the programs should be approved in a very best scenario by the end of 2020. So again, we are in a very crucial phase for us. And secondly, and this is something that also Nicola and Eleftherios said yesterday, European Commission, DG REGIO, has issued the Annex D in the country reports last February. This means that you are expected to identify your needs in terms of investments, and you are expected to put all these needs for investment in a report that will be exchanged with the European Commission and that will be used for the basis, used for the next negotiation. So, after this very brief introduction, allow me to explain how we will work today. This seminar is structured around two main parts. The first part will be focused on territorial strategies, integrated development strategies, and this means that in the first part we will have the opportunity to discuss with the European Commission, other organizations, and also our members about these specific topics. And during the afternoon we will discuss about European territorial cooperation and mainly maritime cooperation. So let's start today, with this first session, where is the remote control, my friend? Okay, thank you. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome our distinguished speakers of today, Eleftherios STAVROPOULOS from DG REGIO, Erik GLØERSEN from Spatial Foresight, which will present ESPON BRIDGES project. Also, it's a pleasure for me to welcome Konstantinos ASPIOTIS, who represent, good morning, who represent the managing authority of the Ionian Islands. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome also representative of the managing authority of Sardinia, NASEDDU, and Manuela MURRU. So I give the floor to the first speaker, Eleftherios, who will introduce a little bit this topic of the ITI, and he will share with us very specific information about the study delivered by the European Commission. So you have the floor. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you, Giuseppe. I will try to sum up a recent study that we did in DG REGIO with the help of an external expert from Italy in order to capture what was the implementation during the 2014-2020 period of it's the other presentation, not this one. It's the other one.
Yes, 8A.
So, in order to see how under the current programming period the member states addressed the issue of insularity, mountainous character that their countries have, or sparsely populated areas with the structural funds. The objective behind these was to look into the programming documents, first of all the partnership agreements, but also into the operational programs of the member states, and to identify and to understand the main characteristics and the trends behind each category of geographical specificity. So for doing this, we have mapped, and only 15 member states out of the 28 during their partnership agreements at the beginning of this programming period, they came forward and they declared that we are facing some geographical specificities. So you see there in the parentheses Austria, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, etc. Then we have started via this study, we wanted also to identify good practices of projects, because we believe that it's very important that we bring forward these good examples also within the Commission, where there are people that are sometimes criticizing that the islands or the mountains are areas that are lagging behind, which is something that we don't believe. It shows that from the practices that we have identified that there are a lot of positive things happening and a lot of dynamism is something also that we saw these 2 days from your presentations, very high quality. And very good things are happening on the islands. And I will explain afterwards how we will disseminate more of these positive examples. And the exercise took us quite a few months of intensive work, because we had then in subsequent steps to read through 136 operational programs. We looked both at national, at regional, and also at European Territorial Cooperation or peace, those programs that had mentioned and they had measures to tackle insularity, mountains, etc. areas. The main findings is that, of course, in general terms, most of the partnership agreements were consistent with the operational programs. But we think that there is sufficient room for improvement in the new programming period. So when you come from an island, either it is a little island or a bigger island, be vigilant and be close to your regional authority when you plan your regional program, when the national authority is debating and preparing the partnership agreement, that they keep a consistency when they say that we have an insular problem and we want to address it via the partnership agreement, that this then it translates into the operational programs, either a sectoral program for transport or a regional operational program of a region, and that they launch, if possible, specific calls for projects to happen on the ground on the islands. The other finding that we had is that every member state used a different way to address the geographical specificities. So some areas, like, for example, South Aegean in Greece or the Åland Islands in Finland, they had a separate regional operational program. In other areas, they had, let's say, different calls for islands, even from sectoral programs. Or there were even different criteria. We saw that there were programs also that they would promote, let's say, give an extra bonus to projects coming from islands. So there are a lot of possibilities from which, if you read the report, you can get inspiration and new ideas. There was, unfortunately, a low take-up of the possibilities offered by the current legislative framework when it comes to flexibility of thematic concentration or of adjustments to co-financing rate. These were possible under the current programming period, but we received from managing authorities, because we did a survey of all of them, a feedback that in reality they didn't use them. As I had the chance to explain yesterday, for example, the co-financing rate would have meant in some cases lower overall public investment. That's why they averted. And this, to a certain extent, also put us in the position in the Commission to think that perhaps for reasons of simplicity, we should avoid repeating these two, let's say, modalities in the new programming period, and instead to create an enabling framework where the islands could, if they want, in agreement with their national governments, have again this thematic concentration or the co-financing rates more preferential, because we count them on a national level, so there is still possibility. And then I will go to the next slide. Of course, it's no surprise that in most of these areas, the partnership agreements on the operational programs, they were trying to put a balance between the preservation and the protection of the environment, and also to have a balanced development. And this is something that came up also from the morning presentations, where we discussed about the importance of biodiversity, or yesterday when we discussed about the environment and the energy and the correlation and interrelation of these issues. Of course, in these areas, we saw that most of the interventions were trying to tackle, let's say, connectivity, both physical and digital as well, better access to public services, renewable energy. The main difficulty that we had is to be able to come up with an amount of money and to say how much it was invested in these areas, because this is easy when you have a region which is insular with a regional operational program. There you say that the whole amount of the program is dedicated to islands. But then when you have a sectoral program from a ministry, let's say the operational program for transport, they don't actually measure how much of the calls that they launch and how much of the projects that they have are happening on an island. And this is because in 2016, we all lost an opportunity to put into the regulation of the Eurostat the three typologies of islands, mountains, and sparsely populated areas. Eurostat is measuring and is getting data only for urban centers, for rural areas, and for coastal areas. So this is what we follow now, compulsory, in the Commission services, because we have the data in order to be able to follow. The other thing that we think that it's very interesting, and we should keep it as a lesson for the future, is that it was possible, and some managing authorities did it, to establish dedicated financial instruments for islands, for mountains, and for sparsely populated areas. So, for example, we had the Finnish case of the Bornholm Island, we had a national financial instrument that was set up for the Bornholm Island in Denmark, and of course there was a financial instrument managed by Almi Invest in Sweden. These now examples we are trying to analyze further, and we have discussed with CPRM that we need to do more workshops of this kind. Let's say to have a dedicated workshop of financial instruments established on islands. And also the Commission offers to you a lot of technical assistance via many mechanisms. We have a dedicated unit which is dealing with financial instruments. We have a mechanism which is called TIEX peer-to-peer. A region or an island, you can launch a request, it's electronic, it's on the website, and you can ask experts to come to your area to help you to establish a financial instrument or to establish an integrated territorial strategy and to help you in this respect. And the Commission is paying for these experts from our own technical budget. It doesn't imply that you have to pay for this. The other main finding, it was the importance of a place-based approach. This is the concept that we want to keep for the future as well. We cannot still plan as islands on a basis of a project by project. Whatever it comes, whenever there is a call from a regional, from a sectoral program, that, okay, let's now see how we can get profit from this call. No, an island needs a strategy, a holistic strategy that looks in all the domains, environment, water management, transport, how you can, let's say, create a skillful workforce, etc. And then this is a place-based approach. You do it together with and participatory approach also that we want to stress. You do it with your citizens in a bottom-up way, and this strategy is tailor-made for your island, for your place. And I will move ahead. When it comes to the islands, there were fewer member states than the original 15 that we saw that dealt with insularity. Of course, it's logical here we don't count, for example, Austria, which is only concerned about their mountainous areas. So these countries that have dealt via their programming documents with insularity, it was Denmark, Greece, Spain, Croatia, France, Malta, Portugal, Italy, and UK. But this is now an oxymoron. During the negotiations that we have for the future programming period, none of these member states raised during the negotiations of the regulations the issue of insularity. So this is again to connect with the discussion that we had yesterday, that we have to be, you have to be as island representatives consistent in all the levels. So if you want to see insularity into the regulations, you need on a local level, regional level, national level, your European representatives in the Parliament, in the Committee of the Regions, in the Council, your permanent representative in the Council, your ministers when they visit, your prime ministers in the European Council, to put the issue on the agenda. It's not that the Commission, we do not want to support the islands, but we are having a mandate which is getting to us by the 28 member state leaders. And they are our masters, our political masters. So we try as much as we can with the regulations to create an enabling environment as simple as possible that can be used in many cases to address all the geographical specificities. But if we have more clear political signals that we have to do more, then we will do more as Commission. There were some differences, of course, between these member states. For example, France and Portugal only refer to insularity in their outermost regions programs, while Sweden, for example, mentioned islands only in sparsely populated areas. You see also that there can be differences in the approach. Now, when it comes to the partnership agreements, there was a remarkable richness in terms of natural and cultural heritage. These were identified as the main niche, the main, let's say, added value that these areas have. And of course, as challenges, most of the cases, they identified the sensitive and fragile ecosystem, the exposure to climate change, the mass tourism, things that we discussed also extensively the last 2 days here. And again, the holistic approach, the integrated planning is necessary because you see that in order to counterbalance between the challenges and to make the challenges into prospects for the future, you need to have this holistic integrated approach. the attention to the impact of the environment. I should not go on with these details. You will get the presentation afterwards, and I will give you also the link where you can read in more detail the report. As I mentioned at the beginning, one big and important part of this analysis was to identify best practices, because we believe that many good things are happening on the islands, on the mountains, on the sparsely populated areas, and sometimes it's important that one learns from the other. So it's better if you have peers, people like you coming from an island, to explain to you how they've managed to make, with the use of the structural funds, a very good project, or have, let's say, positive examples. We saw this also yesterday and this morning, how important it is when we share here good practices and projects that we foster in our area. The importance now is for us to disseminate all these good practices. That's why we are now launching a campaign which will be called the Jewels of Europe. So it will be for the mountains, for the islands, and for the sparsely populated areas, and we will be having from leaflets to theses for projects, but also it will be a social media campaign that we hope to launch before the European elections, and also to intensify as we will be approaching to the end of the year, when the new Commission will come in office, in order to influence their thinking for the future. And for that reason also, we have, as I will show you at the very last slide, an important landmark this year. It's the 10th year, 2019, that the Treaty of Lisbon was ratified and came in force. So it was actually the 1st of December 2009 that the last member state signed the treaty, and the treaty came in force. And this treaty was the one that introduced Article 174 and the important goal for the European Union, which is territorial cohesion. And this we need to signify this year, we believe, with a big event where we will present again good practices from islands, from mountains, and we hope that we will have a new commission with us. The other important thing that we plan to do is to launch a staff working document on geospecificities. We want to bring together all the services of a commission and to put together in an easy way to approach what the different DGs from the Commission, what kind of measures, what kind of programs, what kind of legislation we have which is friendly to the islands and to the mountains, with good examples so that all of you can benefit from what is available out there, and also in order to avoid some misconceptions that sometimes exist. We hear complaints other times rightfully, other times not, that the Commission doesn't have an enabling environment for state aid, for islands, or for mountains. Some things are true, some others are just misconceptions. The report is available on this website, so you can learn more. It's on InfoRegio, where we will be creating also on InfoRegio a special dedicated corner for islands, for mountains, and for sparsely populated areas, with events, with positive things happening, with legislation. And another thing that I would like to mention is also that we are embarking now on a new strand of work which is called territorial impact assessments. So far, the Commission, when launching a new legislative measure, we will do a thorough analysis of the economic, the environmental, and the social impacts, and also the administrative burden. Now we started testing new methodologies in order to be able to analyze the impact of the legislation on the different territories of Europe. This development of the methodology happened the last 2 years. We have tested it in real cases. So 3 directives. One was mentioned yesterday. It was the directive for the waste generated on ship and the port facilities. And because of the analysis that we did, the territorial analysis, it was possible, before bringing the legislation to be examined by the Parliament and by the Council, to get an exemption of the small ports, of the small coastal areas and the small islands, in order to reduce the burden on these places from the waste coming from the big cruise ships, etc. So we have tools that now will be also becoming more compulsory to help to identify the impact of European legislation on islands, on mountains. There was a last development this year. We've managed to put the territorial impact assessment importance into the communication of the Commission for subsidiarity. It was done under Vice President Timmermans, and now we're working together with the Secretariat General of the Commission to prepare new guidelines to all the Commission services that whenever they launch a new legislation, that they should, when it's relevant, analyze also the territorial impacts. And we will be giving them these tools and methodologies that we have developed to support them. Thank you. I will be with you for many.
Thanks a lot, Eleftherios. A lot of things, actually, a lot of information. A couple of remarks from my end before giving the floor to the next speaker. You quoted this idea of organizing a dedicated workshop on financial instruments. Indeed, we are here for you. So let's discuss because we are interested. But we have also to be clear, at the end of the day, we would like also to stress the fact that sometimes, even if there is a very clear knowledge about what are and what could be the potentialities of financial instruments, in some islands there are no the right condition to use this. And this we could accept also this statement. Second point, thanks for giving us the information about the conference for the 10 years, and of course we would like to be associated, formally, to have a political visibility in the conference. And you quoted also this working document on geospecificities. Again, we are here. We could maybe provide you with some information or, I don't know, data that could be useful for you. So, thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, so thank you for this invitation to present. And I'm presenting an ESPON BRIDGES project on pan-European study on geographic specificities. As an experience, just to jump on what was just said, working in parallel, we work on coastal areas, sparsely populated areas, mountain areas, islands all together. It's a real challenge to make it not only cover all of these issues and making it understandable. It quickly becomes quite abstract. That's a bit our challenge in this. And that's something maybe on first teaching to bring on to this exercise of a staff working document. I've been very inspired by these 2 days. I think discussions have been very rich, and they've also given a lot of contextual elements which are very useful for understanding of what we've been doing. I would like to highlight a few of the things that have been said over the last 1.5 days. President Simeoni highlighted that he thinks he has a dialogue of the deaf with the European Commission. So the European Commission, he finds, is listening politely, but it doesn't lead very far. We've also been, have Jean-Didier Ash highlighting that in response to this, hitting on the Commission's head with Article 174 is not a very good idea. It is not constraining, and it doesn't really work. It is an incentive. We need to understand it as an incentive to do things, not something we can use to constrain authorities with. Also, Eleftherios yesterday mentioned to us that, he insisted that cohesion policy is not a redistribution policy, but an investment policy. And we need to take that on board as well. This is the starting point for what we can do. And finally, Nick Brooks yesterday showed that we need to have much more interest in the territorial agenda. Because territorial cohesion is the key, the pursuit of territorial cohesion is really losing momentum. It is not so high on the agenda. And this is the key to bring islands back on the scene, back at the core of attention. So we need to use the territorial agenda as a vector of bringing territorial cohesion back at the core of our attention. Now this is a bit, for me, the whole nexus we've been struggling with in this study of geographic specificities, all of these elements. And ESPON is a program which has as a motto to inspire policy making with territorial evidence. And, well, a first issue, which shouldn't be a problem really, is that islands are not lagging, not as a category. And that's been part of the answer of the Commission. Precisely when you come to them and say, well, we islands are struggling with things, they reply, well, but your population is not really decreasing, at least not as more than any other part of Europe. Your economic performance is not significantly lower than it's as diverse as the rest of Europe. Employment is as diverse as the rest of Europe. So there is no basis in the treaty to really say we need to focus on the basis of lagging. The part of the answer to that is maybe we are not looking at the right figures. Maybe island issue can be that the transport connections are not reliable. Sometimes weather makes it impossible to connect the island to the mainland, or it is not arriving at the appropriate times. Issues that are very specifically insular simply do not appear in Eurostat statistics at all because it's not an issue for the rest of Europe. So maybe we're looking at the wrong sets of figures to say that nothing is significant about islands. But that's maybe yet another topic. I think to be remembered also, we know that policy is driven by facts, and if we're not looking at the right facts, we're not going to get very far. So this bringing on the table the fact that you need to have the right figures and looking at the right things, and maybe pan-European Eurostat statistics is not the basis for all policy making is important. But then how do we try to deal with this? And I'm already bringing up a bit of all the complexities of this, getting beyond this idea, well, how can we approach all of this? There are a number of dimensions, and we've been trying to look through, we have these 4 types of geographic specificities, which you see on top of this cube here I'm showing you. And then we're trying to look at all the different sectoral issues. That's very good to see that now the approach is inter-service at the Commission. You're bringing on all the sectors in this discussion. We've been covering innovation, sustainable tourism, transport, public service obligations in the transport sector, transition in labor market transitions, the movements of people moving in and out of labor markets of islands and mountain areas, sparsely populated areas. We've been inquiring what is the economic basis, what really brings on the fundament for income that makes it possible to have an island economy. We're looking at protected areas, what is specific about protecting areas in these areas in the rest of Europe. Energy provision and energy production in geographically specific areas, and exposure to climate change, sorry. And all of this, of course, is already very wide. We knowingly have left out agriculture and fisheries because our studies simply couldn't allow for these enormous other topics. But we have all this span of sectoral ways into it. And then another thing that often comes in, and was actually part of the request from our clients, was to say, well, you have objective factors of constraint, and they say, oh, we should approach this from the angle of vulnerability to change, or access to markets that may be more difficult, that provision of service of general interest may be more challenging, the notion of insularity more abstract, not only on islands, sometimes very remote sparse labor market in the north of Sweden are somewhat characterized as insular, so you can have other types of insularity. Remoteness of being far away from cities, or the lack of critical mass. There is a temptation there when you look at islands to say, well, we are small, but then, oh, but we have Sicily. Or we are far from markets, but you have German islands, which are not that far away, or Dutch islands, they're not that far away from the islands. If you try to dissolve the type, if you try to take the island away and say, we are going to make it rational for you, you realize that the island is lost. And that's a bit of an issue. We're trying to bring it again down to these objective factors, and then we lose what was the initial, what is bringing together people here today. And I think that's a very important finding. We maybe need to remind ourselves what brings us together, and it's maybe not something that experts can bring down to rational facts. It is maybe simply because we have things to say to each other, we recognize each other, and this is also something that you will see at other levels down dealing with other stakeholders. We are dealing regional policies about people, and we need to talk to people with concepts that are understandable. We are in a world which is increasingly complex, and we still need to make policies that now should be in a tweet. What kind of concepts can try to make this possible? And maybe concepts like island make this possible because they bring people together, because they make they are a starting point, a hook on which you can associate, to which you can associate all these complexities of intersectoral interdependencies and multiple objective factors. Coming on top of this is, of course, what are we really trying to do with the policy? The role of policymakers is not to replace private investors to try to build the infrastructure that in replacing that old infrastructure or create the companies. The role is to really address an issue, especially from the European level. Where is the European added value? So then we can identify different types of situations. Are we dealing with a market failure? So a situation where the market leads to a suboptimal use of resources or leads to an unsustainable situation. Are we dealing with a policy inadequacy? We have a European policy or a national policy, but in islands it happens not to produce the effects that policymakers thought that they would produce or were aiming at in general. We can have policy dependence. Some territories are really working or functioning because they have a policy that's been there for some decades, and we need to be very careful not to change that equilibrium, or we will have a strong negative effect. Or we can have path dependence, really saying what we are observing today is because of how islands were functioning 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 20 years ago, and this is another type of situation and calls for other types of policy answers. We've tried then to argue that in relation to this complexity, we admit that we have diverse islands. We have to incorporate their diversity, but we can try to build a narrative of what is island and why could it make sense to have a European perspective on islands. So I'll go very quickly through this aspect because you know all of these subjects by heart. I'm just what we're trying to highlight, what do we think can make sense to have at the European level as core elements of a dialogue on islands. First thing is connectivity challenges. We know that there are insufficiently frequent, reliable, affordable transport connections in a number of areas, and they can negatively impact development. That's typically a form of market failure. The private companies do not spontaneously offer the transport services that are needed for a balanced development, so market failure. We see that the answer to this market failure, which is now increasingly then with the pressure from the European level, public service obligations, so no longer direct provision of services by public authority, but interacting through contracts with private providers, is very complex. And often for small local communities, regional communities, having this to function, presupposing that you would have a market of providers that would compete and then arriving at something cost efficient, it simply doesn't work like that. So having some kind of framework support to how you run a good public service obligation contract and what that requires is important. Digital connectivity is often brought forward as the answer to a lot of issues, but we observe on the ground that if it's not accompanied by soft measures, it often fails to produce what we hoped it would lead to. Second big axis is on energy and energy provision. We have the Island Energy Initiative. We just summarize some of the main elements on this reliance on fossil energy, the vulnerability to disruptions, the vulnerability to fluctuating energy costs, so if we're very dependent on some types of energy provision, and the difficulty to manage intermittency of these emerging renewable energy sources. I'll not dwell on these, it has been discussed extensively. We have a big challenge of sustainable tourism in Ireland, partly linked to the limited resources, land resources, waste disposal, the social impact of small communities. An example is the regulation of cruise tourism, which has dramatic impacts on some island communities. And more generally, we can identify some shared issues with regard to economic development horizons. We know that if you want to have a knowledge-based development in islands, you basically you're telling young people to move out, get educated. And we know that a part of those will not come back. So we have a structurally imbalanced migration pattern. And we need to do something about that. Return migration is part of it, but also bringing in new talent. So a proactive public policy on how people are moving is needed if you want to have knowledge-based development. The more you encourage people to study, to go for higher education, the bigger this problem will be, or the challenge will be. We also know that islands have specific assets. They can be test beds for new solutions. So these are assets that could be used proactively. We have explored specifically the notion of residential economy, partly in relationship to this challenge of sustainable tourism. If you look, we have a very big hegemonic European discourse on the fact that you need to be competitive, you need to have export-oriented activities. This is the foundation of a good regional development. When you look at many of the regional analysis, we see that actually just having people is the by far the biggest chunk of your economic foundation. So bringing in pensioners, as has been done by some European countries, can bring just as much revenue, income, as having some kind of very competitive new industry. And taking this on board and seeing how this potential of what we call residential economy, focusing on just bringing in people that are not coming in for working for some new new export-oriented economic sector, but simply being there and having this as part of the role of islands in the broader European context is meaningful. And finally, the whole strength, not only for islands, but all geographic specificities, is that they are recognizable. We know islands. Islands are much better known across Europe, considering their size and other types of territories. And this brand can be exploited better, and the disconnection is a competitive advantage. And this taking on board the idea that the specificity is an advantage is, of course, something that can be discussed, where exchanges of good practices, good experiences is an asset. So finally, just managing all of this can be challenging in Ireland. We know that there are strong social ties in a number of islands, but this is also a risk. Some islands have risks of proximity between regulators and regulated, between authorities, public, private actors. All of this also calls for, there can be European added value in coming into these kinds of relations, which are difficult politically, also often linked to the national context. So a bit of a distance when you observe and you try to improve the way the governance structures can be useful. We see that some islands are undergoing a rapid demographic change. Some are with very attractive tourist destinations. They are suffering under excessive inflows of newcomers. Others have rapid demographic decline. So all of this, the demographic development, it also has an impact on how you can govern and who you are interacting with. And we also have diverse then patterns of some islands which have a very strong culture of adaptation, new context, they change their economies as context changed, and others have developed an over-reliance of central governments, a more path-dependent type of approaches. All of this then brings us to propose really something, a relational perspective, to say that the territorial strategies context that that has been now just mentioned as a framework where you could build on this focus on insularity in cohesion policy could be thought of in relation to islands from a really relational perspective. So you need to bring on board the actors for which the island is a relevant notion in their development, which is not necessarily only the actors on the islands, but all those that interact with the island. So not thinking of islands as isolate, as something you focus on in exclusively, you close the policy, but on the contrary, opening it, because the answers are often in the island-mainland relations. A proactive European approach, so ensuring that we do not have the same type of issues that we can have in the current programming period, where the optional arrangements for cohesion policy of the type territorial strategies were not taken on board much, would require some form of EU island initiatives, which is a form of multi-level governance, saying, well, if you're around these types of issues that I just described to you, you can build some kind of supporting structures, some kind of bodies where you do bring together all the island-related initiatives in cohesion policy at European level, building a discourse around it, structuring them as a discourse with all its tentacular relations to different sectors. And below that, building up, what is then, if there is such a generic European discourse on islands, what would be the national discourses, what would be the regional ones, so trying to build this kind of pyramidal structures which would provide a background, support, a visibility to initiatives that would be developed as type territorial strategies, and not making just some kind of option that might pop up in Italy and might pop up in Sweden, but then the rest remains quite invisible and certainly quite incapable of having a dialogue at the EU level with transport policy, energy policy, etc. So we need to make exactly the same type of structure as you saw this morning's presentation by Dania Abdullah Balak on, you saw this pyramid this morning on how she thought you could bring in environmental issues in the policies. It's the same type here, how you bring in the insular issues. You need to have these structures at the different levels, and this needs to be established. To some extent, what we're discussing here is this. We, CPMR, is discussing it. If it could be formalized somehow in relationship to cohesion policy, so no specific program, but some kind of parallel structure that organizes, stimulates, brings together the actors, organizes the dialogue, so that you can somehow bring together the positive energies, give some visibility, make the dialogue possible at the appropriate levels. So those are our observations based. I'm really now in very short presentation of a huge study. What I have been jumping to as conclusions, with jumping our oral case study and what led to this. I would encourage you, our draft final report is published now in the coming weeks, so you can have a look on the ESPON website where it will be published. And I would also very much appreciate any feedback idea you had around these ideas. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to both of you. So we talked about geographical specificities. We talked about the potential role of strategies. Let's move to the implementation, to the reality of the ground. And it's a pleasure for me to start the remote control, please. Yes. To start the second part of this first session, which is expected to be a roundtable. And I would like to the remote control. I would like to share with you and with my guest this leading question. Of course, you are aware because we sent it to you yesterday and last weeks. So the exercise now is, please share with us what are the experience of the ground when it comes to the implementation of integrated strategies and when it comes to these specific tools that are expected to be a solution to our insularity. So please, you have the floor. Konstantinos, you are the first.
Good morning. Welcome to CORFU. My name is Konstantinos ASPIOTIS. I'm the head of the monitoring team of the Cohesion Fund of the Managing Authority in the region of Ionian Islands. Maybe I'm not the best person to provide this analysis, but unfortunately, my colleague had a personal commitment and couldn't attend. Now, I will try to develop and share with you how the managing authority of the region included territorial strategies in the operational program of the Ionian Islands for 2014 to 2020, and how we managed to make integrated special investments or urban investments. The main characteristic of this region is its insular nature. The islands have some joint shared characteristics when it comes to their production and cultural background, and their total economy is directly influenced by tourism on the one hand and by the connectivity and communication with the mainland. But at the same time, the region of the Ionian Islands has a prominent position in what is being called the macro region of the Adriatic and the Ionian. Among the islands of the region, there are some differences when it comes to their social and economic situation, and also demographic trends and production trends. Moreover, in this region, we have the phenomenon of double insularity. Big islands such as Kefalonia, Zakynthos, Corfu are connected to the mainland, while smaller islands, for example, the Apontia, Paxi, Ithaca, are faced with double insularity. Nevertheless, our islands have a lot of advantages that offer them the opportunity to utilize the opportunities offered by the framework. They have a cultural wealth, they have a specific identity, they have a skilled workforce, they have a long history. Of course, all these elements are either smaller or bigger in each island, but if correctly utilized, they can offer a significant growth potential. Having said that, and taking this into account, territorial investments should be spatially focused, and they should take into account the particular specified, the productive model of each island, the potential of each island, and the need for recovery from the financial crisis. During the implementation of the operational program, we realized that integrated spatial growth actions allow for integrated growth strategies to be developed. One of those tools is the integrated spatial investments, as I already said, that can be financed by structural funds through combined investments from different thematic objectives from one or multiple OPs. Now, according to the approved operational program Ionian Islands 2014-2020, the investments in this region concern urban areas mainly. So, urban areas that gather a lot of people, that have cultural stock, and we propose to further develop cultural economy, meaning the connection between the cultural stock and business opportunities. Now, based on that, we proposed and finally chosen to design and implement an integrated spatial strategy in the old town of Corfu. The area of intervention is a historic center of the city, and also in the modern part of the city. The historic center of Corfu is a UNESCO monument. It is a rich cultural product, and this totally met the requirements that I've already set above. I will shortly analyze this integrated spatial investment, how it started and how it ended. The city of Corfu, the town of Corfu, is the administrative center of the region, the administrative capital of the region. It is also a UNESCO monument, and it has rich cultural resources and identity. Particularly, the old town of Corfu is characterized by Venetian architectural characteristics, such as the fortresses, the buildings such as the old San Giacomo Theatre, the town hall, museums such as the Archaeological Museum and the Asian Art Museum, the Historical Archive of Corfu, the Philharmonic Orchestras, So thanks to all these elements, the town of Corfu attracts many visitors, many guests, and has a rather intense touristic activity. However, this is characterized by seasonality, and it's mainly during the summer months. The port and the airport of Corfu are the main entrance gate to the town and in general to the island of Corfu. Finally, in the town of Corfu, the Ionian University is seated, and its departments and faculties are consistent with the nature and the identity of the town, and with the topic of the integrated spatial investment. So, based on the local strategy for the town of Corfu, we realized that there are three main elements: rich cultural and immaterial heritage. It's the seat of the Ionian University, and we have a good workforce. So based on the chosen scenario, the town of Corfu is invited and is challenged to connect its two dimensions, the dimension of the monument with the dimension of a live and creative town, but at the same time facing many functional problems, both for guests and for permanent residents. Therefore, the proposed spatial strategy focuses on the following points: highlighting the historic and cultural characteristics of the city, the highlight of new urban points within the town that are connected to the development of and implementation of smart technologies, the gradual development of a new sector, the so-called creative and cultural economy, the development of the urban cultural tourism by utilizing this special identity of the town of Corfu, the integrated management of the town of Corfu as an international tourist destination, and at the same time we wanted to be able to manage tourism flows that come into our town in a specific period of time and use them to further promote the destination. So what's the conclusion? Well, we can promote the town as an internationally recognized multi-product, multicultural destination. We had to tackle the aforementioned challenges, and we did that by making three strategic choices. First choice, to use the competitive edges in order to create new business opportunities and employment opportunities within the creative and cultural economy. Second choice, to make Corfu an internationally acknowledged destination. And thirdly, sustainable management of the cultural product and of tourism flows. My time is almost up, so I would like now to just share with you a few more information on the approved integrated spatial investment, which was approved in the 1st of June 2018. The total budget is 71 million euros, out of which about 28 million are expected to come from the operational program the regional operational program for the Ionian Islands, and it is co-funded by the European Social Fund and the European Regional Fund. Another point at which I would like to focus without analyzing it too much is governance and implementation of this approved strategy and the implementation of the investment. A big challenge for us when we prepared the integrated spatial investment was the various micro-interests that you came across in the various organizations that we invited to participate in this investment. Of course, that was expected due to the economic interests that sometimes are conflicting, and I'm talking interests of the various teams that were involved or we wish to involve. Allow me to conclude with a few words on the new programmatic period of 2021-2027. I will fully agree with the previous speakers. European islands, either remote ones or smaller ones, either in the Atlantic or in the Mediterranean or in the North Sea, policy makers, the European Commission and national governments should understand that those islands are inhabited by people that have the same needs with the residents that live in Brussels or in Athens or in Paris. So we need to come up with tools, we need to implement strategies that can meet those needs and provide those people that have either chosen or were forced to stay on the islands to have access to health, safe transport, clean energy. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Konstantinos, for your interesting presentation. Now I give the floor to our special guests from Sardinia, Marco and Manuela. Please stay focused on enabling factors and obstacles or challenges in order to design and implement an integrated strategy for the current programming period, and please try also to provide us with some information or recommendation for the future programming period. So you have the floor.
Grazie Giuseppe, grazie per l'invito.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure that we have the opportunity to participate in these two meetings. Discussion focusing on insularity. We're all islanders, so it is our common purpose to highlight the differences entailed in the concept of insularity. And we would like to present in a very concise way our experience about it. Our activity started in 2014. So in the current programmatic period, we have been active for the past 4 years, and we have been trying to implement our strategy. In 2014, we introduced 4 innovations that characterized the entire programmatic period with regard to the intervention that we had decided. Those innovations are 3, not 4, and they were included in our policy. Well, in general, I would say that we had a positive outcome. I believe that another positive fact was the fact that this initiative ran in parallel with the programming period. Back in 2014, when we started scheduling the current programmatic period and the interventions to be applied, we tried to create a convergence between the 2 documents. First of all, we wanted to focus on the optimal management of resources. I'm not only talking about financial resources, all types of resources that were mobilized for the various aspects of the program. We're here to represent the managing authority, and this managing authority is the contact point among the resources and investments. Another thing that we wanted to achieve is integration among the various projects and programs. We wanted to deal with the ERDF, the European Social Fund, and fisheries funds, as well as cultural funds. So you understand that we try to combine specific financing tools depending on the investments that we wanted to run. Another thing that we try to do is the implementation of the specificity and the specialization. What we want to do is have local development strategies. And in that view, we wanted to collect resources. We tried to include the development model as a common denominator. The island was divided in separate working zones. We know that the programming period was complete, I must say. Therefore, we expanded our view and we tried to unite all the bullets. This means that we want to have a comprehensive framework that you can see here, which is indicative of our strategy. There are different tools. This is a tool that was valuable for the urban areas. Manuela is going to offer you some practical examples of the main areas of Sardinia: Cagliari, Sassari, and Olbia. And after that, there's a differentiation between the rural areas, the urban areas, although investments in this respect were developed in the framework of rural development, we had two different approaches. In the programming period 2014-2020, actually when it was announced by the minister, 2 or 3 experimental fields were given. This is what we tried to do. So we divided the less privileged, centrally located Sardinia areas that had resources on which we could build. And then we also had a national strategy, meaning the national resources, and we tried to achieve convergence among those things in an effort to overcome some barriers. First of all, services for people and mobility. So we selected some areas. Some of the ones that were selected had less than 10,000 citizens. So you understand that Sardinia and Sicily are very big islands, considering, of course, the semi-autonomous status of the island. So we work closely with Sicily, and we know very well the specificities of the areas that were selected. We talk about densely populated areas, 10,000 citizens per square kilometers. So, in order to get back to the less privileged areas, those areas are inhabited mainly by the elderly, people who have difficult access to public services, and therefore we try to see what's the possibility to create jobs and better accessibility to public services. Then we try to transfer this level from the national to the regional level using the ERDF resources and funds. All this happened through strategic interventions. an intervention at the coastal area of Oristano at the west end of the island, and another one at the mainland, but at a mountainous area. This is the Mantolise Bobagia. And of course, the two areas have entirely different characteristics. Another thing that we try to do, we included a national park because we wanted to include a new element, the use and exploitation of historical, cultural and natural heritage. That was not visible enough, and we wanted to include that in the broader regional development policy. You know that there's a great challenge for this area. For the less privileged areas, I must say that during the 80s or the 90s, Sardinia suffered radical transformation with the creation of extensive installations and premises being built across the entire island. This also led to significant crisis, and that's why we try to deal with those handicaps for the particular areas. We tried to focus on SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, in order to build a network that will be the alternative to the big industrial areas. As you can imagine, once they shut down, many of employees were left unemployed and found themselves unemployed, and that created the crisis. Those remote and abandoned industrial premises are at the heart of the regions. This is where we focus our interventions in order to use the regional funds. And on the right side, you can see some of the interventions with regards to rural areas and coastal areas. This is where we use the rules proposed by the European regulation and the legal framework. And of course, all those things are part of a program which at the end of the programming period is marked with red and is part of the broader territorial strategy. Well, all those things lead to specialization and convergence of resources. That was our goal. That was the common denominator that we had in mind when we wanted to mobilize all types of resources, from structural funds even. You can see the social fund in red, the ERDF in green, fisheries funds and other types of funds. So we try to include all those things. And of course, we included the national resources. On this chart, you can see the local development approach. Those are the mechanisms where we want to focus. Horizon 2020 was not exactly a piece of cake to implement. We tried to focus on local development, always involving the local agencies, local stakeholders. We didn't want just to have the region setting the rules. We wanted to involve local authorities as well as the local communities, and that's why we divided the region in sub-territories so that we can propose territorial development programs that would be relevant and consistent. And all that always in compliance with the rules of the European Union regarding expenses. Despite the fact that there are many obstacles and barriers, we tried to mobilize all the resources. When we had difficulties in using the regional funds, we used the local funds and vice versa. When it comes to infrastructure, because this is where we're still lagging behind competition-wise, we don't have railway, we don't have highways, we're still lacking critical infrastructure that could connect even the ports of the island. and the mainland. This is something that would help us have a competitive edge. As a result, we have but a few investments. What we try to do? Well, we try to combine the different needs depending on the various tools. You will see that in the regional strategy and the partnership agreement, we try to include all those aspects. We also wanted to optimize the first phase of the period all the resources available by Brussels. And of course, you can see the graphs, including the key points that have to do with the discussion that we have, and of course, insularity. Well, as you know, we share those disadvantages that other areas are affected from. Those are the disadvantages of insularity. Sicily and our area have the same disadvantages. I heard to the presentation made by the colleague from Sicily yesterday. It was very interesting. And we know that many opportunities lie on this point. Mr. Stavropoulos mentioned that we have many opportunities, and I would like to thank him for the useful discussion we had. He talked about how we could go to Brussels and have the rules changed. We cannot just stay back, being remote and waiting for the rules to be issued. We need to be actively involved. We need to have our own contribution. I'm not saying that we should radically change all regulations, but in any way, we need to serve our own needs and interests. We worked with Corsica in order to draft a strategic document. This is where we saw that if we wanted to have a reallocation of the budget depending on the GDP, this would be an impediment that would prevent us from focusing on our disadvantages and handicaps. We need to talk about the broader situation we found ourselves in and all the disadvantages that have to do with the market, the lack of infrastructure. In Sardinia, there is desertification. First of all, it all starts from the central areas. People move from the mountainous areas to the coastal areas or vice versa, or some people flee the island. So reinforcing the market is a key here in our case. What is more, we should, of course, help companies go more international. There's no other solution for local businesses. This contradicts, however, our previous endeavors of ourselves in order to preserve companies and have them stay in our areas. In the area of transport, we weren't able to create economies of scale. The fact that we're surrounded by sea means that it is difficult for us to network with other areas. That's why we're missing proximity that would enable more exchanges and transactions. Thanks to technology, we have overcome this barrier, but it's something that still needs to be discussed. Education and training is equally important. Sardinia, only few young people managed to graduate from high school. And those who managed to go the superior to higher education are but a few. There are extensive difficulties faced by the citizens. They also have a hard time finding a job on our island. Our youth studies and then flees the island. They don't return to strengthen the local economy. Those are the main disadvantages. Another one is the fact that we're lacking infrastructure. Like I said before, there's no connection among the basins of the island. No one cares about investing on those remote lines. We're also interested in that from our citizens, commodities. I would say that, as it has already been mentioned, there are specificities about insularity. It's something that we share with the other fellow islands, and this is something that makes it more difficult for us to find our right position on the map. And prior giving the floor to Manuela, who's going to talk about urban interventions, here you can see territorial interventions in Sardinia. The programming period, because I must say that almost 300 million were given for territorial development, 120 came from a single fund, the ERDF. This money was maximized, was used to the maximum. And you can see different colors to see the funds that were involved. Well, that's the challenge that we need to face. The fifth strategic goal is to involve citizens. We definitely want to be closer to our citizens. We know that this is important. However, we need to take a leap of quality development. That's why it's useful to capitalize on the European Union's motto, stay close to the citizens, but in order to do that, there are some gaps that need to be bridged before we reach that point. Thank you very much. Now the floor to Manuela. I will try to be very brief.
Ma allora io vi voglio raccontare la nostra esperienza.
So I will try to be quick, but not too quick, let's hope. Thanks to the structural funds, we tried to promote the urban agenda by using the integrated spatial investments. So, by intervening the three biggest towns of our area, we tried to promote integration of policies. We tried to converge our policies through a holistic approach to EU funds. We tried to intervene in these three urban centers because we had identified a very specific area, a neighborhood in these cities, in these towns, and our strategy was based on social integration. So we can understand that we identified disadvantaged areas within these cities. The regional authority co-designed these programs for over 2 years along with municipal authorities, and this happened because we had to tackle a challenge that was about these interventions. The reporting date had gone by, and quite often the municipalities went to the regional authority with a list of infrastructure interventions, as you might go to the supermarket with your list, but without having made the necessary planning, the necessary design. So we wanted to start thinking the other perspective, to focus on the content, and once the content was there, meaning the necessary interventions to be made, then the infrastructure interventions should support the already mentioned content. Another integrated spatial investment was related to governance, and that was a major challenge as well, because we had to assign to municipal authorities to delegate some of our competencies to municipal authorities. And of course that demanded capacity building investments. We wanted to enhance local authorities and help them use the funds from structural funds. So I would like to share with you this experience. Here you can see the intervention in Sassari, in the historic town of Sassari, which, as time went by, was marginalized and just became a marginalized area within the urban fabric. This was caused mainly because of the drastic changes to urban fabric a few decades ago, when too many people abandoned the historic center to move to the suburbs. Therefore, the disadvantaged, the most vulnerable teams moved to the historic center, and this led to a process of marginalization. The quality of life decreased, and the same applied to the situation of buildings. That was a vicious circle. The new populations had a foreign origin, and they just moved to the historic centers because the rent prices was very low, and the same applied to the quality of buildings. Therefore, the historic center was not inhabited by the traditional population, but by most vulnerable groups. So, an urban reconstruction was the aim of the Sassari local authority. There is an important festival organized on an annual basis by the municipality of Sassari. It is a festival that is protected. It is this that allowed us to create a museum route, and we managed to make some interventions in order to rediscover old professions and support the historic center of the city and the public services provided within the center. The other intervention was in Cagliari, in the municipality of Cagliari. The selected area is characterized mainly by residences, but at the same time, there is a rather arduous situation, social situation, and a strong presence of juvenile criminality, delinquency. So the objective was to enhance family policies for disadvantaged families. Also accommodation. For example, we increased social residences, the number of social residences. There were some co-housing experiments. And also other social services. Another effort had to do with the reconstruction of public spaces and the creation of safe routes that would be deprived of this delinquency. We tried to create safe routes from school to home, home to school, school to home to work, and vice versa. Another interesting case is the following intervention. The population of this area decided to tackle the problem of studies abandonment, school dropout. Families don't go their children to go to the neighborhood schools because they're afraid for their safety. So they don't want their children to attend the neighborhood schools. So the neighborhood schools, the teachers actually, started an initiative. So again, we tried to attract young pupils. That was the idea behind the initiative. An innovative experimental school, a quality school that will attract pupils from other areas. Let's innovate even when it comes to the syllabus. So as to change the atmosphere and give new life to the educational fabric of the area. Now we'll talk about the last town, the town of Olbia. Again, we chose an area within the town, a marginalized area, characterized by social and economic problems. And here was the situation. What was the specificity of the neighborhood? It is rather isolated. The road network is constructed in such a way that rather isolates this area. There is also a lagoon that's close to this area. In this case, the social strategy's objective was to allow this area to be reconnected to the rest of the town in order to handle the problem of degradation and marginalization. So it was mainly environmental readdressment, reconstruction, the improvement of the natural landscape through the creation of a natural, improved, re-established area around the lagoon, and also infrastructure interventions that would create a natural park. Now, a final comment in view of the new programmatic period. In our opinion, the use of the integrated spatial investments was a challenge. Not so much financially speaking, because it was only 3% that came from the ERDF. During our experimentation process, we were accompanied by an expert, and currently we are wondering about what will happen in the new programmatic period. This instrument, this tool, allows our municipalities to achieve capacity building in order for them later on to autonomously use the resources in the best possible way. And there are already some achievements that were thanks to the know-how of that came from other European programs as well. The second issue is that when those tools are valid, then we manage to find targeted solutions to our problem. And what is equally important is that our urban agenda and the relevant interventions had to be inclusive, had to be participatory, mainly during the implementation phase, but also during the designing phase. What needs to be explored is whether indeed that boosted the feeling of belonging. So to what degree, or whether citizens now feel that they play a decisive part in the implementation of the projects, or if they feel that those interventions are imposed on them. Thank you.
Now we have really 10 minutes maximum, 15 minutes maximum, no more. So we can open the debate. Do you have any burning question or comments? Please, you have the floor. And also from our special guest, of course. Yes. Okay, 3. Let's start and then you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I have a question to Mr. Eleftherios STAVROPOULOS. It concerns the workshop you mentioned on financial instruments. I would like to know what are your expectations from that, and would you also bring in participants from the venture capitalist society? I would also very briefly share with you a little bit about multi-fund coordination in Gotland when it comes to LEADER, the LEADER program. There are 48 LEADER areas in Sweden, and there are only 8 of them having the 4 funds, that is the Social Fund, the Regional Development Fund, the Maritime and Fishery Fund, and also the Rural Development for Agricultural Fund. Now, it seems to be, this was a solution made for Gotland because Gotland is a very small area, it's a small island, so in order to keep it as an area, this was a very good solution for Gotland. And it seems to be working very well. It provides Scotland with framework for thinking together and bringing people together, different actors and stakeholders. The people working at the LEADER office, they've also been able to reach out to many more potential project managers within different fields. They've also been able to bring people together when there are conflicts of interest. For instance, landowners who are supposed to take care of the roads, accessing the waterfront, that is not obvious for them to do it just because tourist companies want to use those roads to take their customers down for the fishing, for instance, and things like that. So they've been able to make some projects out of that. I think that's very interesting. It's also provided them that with a facilitating form, they can now actually facilitate more ideas and use the LEADER method in a more cohesive way. So generally when people come to them, they say that we have this practical problem, we want to solve it. But of course, the LEADER is not always interested. LEADER project is not interested in that. We want to bring it into our regional strategies, our goals, and make people aware of that as well. So actually, it's like a learning experiment in the same time. So actually, I think we are making the people who are possible to run projects in the future more capable through this multi-fund coordination. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
There was another question, maybe? Yes, and then we move here.
Yes. Is it functional? Okay, we have now almost for 2 days talking about what's the specificities for islands, and I have to say for 2 years ago we had exactly the same discussion. What actually separates the island from other outmost region? There's at least 5 elements, which is quite easy. We are surrounded by water, which we have been talking about. We have a difficult of economy of scale. I mean, we have one dairy on the island, we have one slaughterhouse on the island. It's very difficult to have economy of scale. We have no commuter possibilities to other areas. I mean, if you are unsatisfied with the theater on the island of Bornholm, where I'm coming from, I cannot go to the next municipality to see their theater. We cannot cooperate with other municipalities, for example, for the road equipment, etc. The 4th element is there's an asymmetry in the transport patterns. For example, on Bornholm, it's more expensive because we are having more import than export. So sometimes you have to pay for the lorry both for coming into Bornholm and getting out of Bornholm. A fifth element is that it's quite interesting that some goods are not possible to have to Bornholm. I mean, if I go on the internet, you can go to Amazon everywhere, and I want to click for the goods, it's not possible to have the goods for the island. Sixth, and last but not least, I mean, if you are talking about the transport time in kilometers, if you take, for example, the Scottish island to the main center in Europe in kilometers, it's not more than, for example, for other regions. But if you take the transport time using ferry, using airplane, I mean, you can multiply this transport time. So these 6 elements are just core points explaining why it's more difficult to be on an island comparing to other remote areas. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Erik. So we have another question first. Yeah.
First row here.
Yeah. George, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will speak in Greek. I believe that the workshop that was just completed has been very useful, both for the political representatives of the islands as well as for technocrats. And being a geography expert myself in science work and regional development, I can fully understand those aspects. Sometimes we islanders believe that no one knows what our island looks like. However, today, listening to the studies presented by Mr. GLØERSEN and Mr. Stavropoulos, I was able to identify the identity of my island, other islands. I saw my island on those studies. The conclusion, therefore, is that islands have been mapped. Their identities are known. However, what we need is, like Mr. Stavropoulos said, we need to have the insularity dimension penetrating all levels of political representation. It's not enough having the mayor saying something, the regional governor saying something, the minister saying something. No, we need to have the prime minister telling this something to their cabinet. And we need to convince our political representatives to include insularity on their agenda and have it rank high. Didier mentioned it yesterday. It's also a matter of people, the people you talk to, and whether those people have a good feeling about their insularity. Another point I would like to make is that, after all, there are funding tools that can be used by some islands. The most important thing is that we have methodologies available for the development of islands. I'm talking about the invitation by Mrs. Stavropoulos, who said that experts can focus on specific island, propose a development method. Because even if an island won the lottery with a big prize, then the question remains how this money would be used. Would it be channeled to this sector, to the other sector? There's not an easy answer. My third point has to do with the local development. I believe that the indigenous development is the safest method for the development of the islands. What does it mean? It means that we need to ensure that our population doesn't flee the islands. The youth that has already left the island to study needs to return. And this is a remark made by Sardinia as well. They also mentioned that those rates are very important. Investments and opportunities should be attracted to an island for young people, young entrepreneurs. And I would like to say that development cannot be imported to an island. Experience can be imported to an island. Successful development is the development that begins from the island. And I have a couple of questions. We have seen operational programs that are being rated as unsuccessful on the basis of the traditional established ranking, and then the regions were demoted on the basis of their GDP per capita. Maybe their efforts with regards to the ranking and the rating of the Commission might have been successful, but instead of having them being promoted upwards, they're being demoted. What does that mean? Does it mean a failure of investment policies, or does it mean that if they weren't in place, their failure would be twice as much? A second point of concern: if those integrated spatial investments at Cagliari, Sassari, and elsewhere, are they able to alter the course of events? Those investments were welcome. It was something missing from small islands. Maybe Paris, London, Frankfurt have already completed these investments, but our islands might not have completed them. But are those investments able to alter the course of events? Can those studies evaluate and assess the impact of those investments at this very small scale that is important for the islands? Can they mobilize things to move towards a different direction? Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Maybe you want to add? There is another question. Okay, please.
Yes, very quickly. J'ai été très sensible aux interventions.
Actually, I really enjoyed the words by Mrs. Stavropoulos and Erik and everyone else. In any case, I agree that there's a common belief about what unites us and what sets us apart. I know that there's a common sensitivity. The second point with regards to satisfaction, it has to do with the fact that we all agree on the methodology. We can all understand what an island is all about. The method you described before is an integrated vertical and horizontal method, always considering the position of the Commission. I'm not only talking about DG REGIO or DG MOVE. When it comes to the operational level, the question I'm asking to myself, maybe, and it's something that has been heard by other colleagues, maybe also to the Council or the Parliament. When it comes to the operational level and the functional level, maybe our Commission should establish a new approach. And rather than speaking to one concrete person, I don't know who this person is, but anyway, I believe that we need to find out who is the right person to talk to in order for things to be more realistic, pragmatic. Speak about the heart of the things rather than just waiting to be referred to someone else. A new programming period is on the way. And of course, we want to be involved in those tools and instruments. Thank you very much.
And then, please.
Okay, thank you, Giuseppe. So, just one thing that's going to be very important going into the future for the islands of Europe is that there would be some island-proofing mechanism within the EU structures. We allegedly have this in Ireland, but it doesn't operate correctly. What I mean by island-proofing is that when legislation is being looked at or is being drawn up, that is taken into account how this legislation might affect the islands or how it might have a negative effect on the islands. That doesn't happen now. Regarding the islands, yes, I agree with my colleagues here. Yeah, a lot of the issues or the challenges for the islands are the same, whether you have 100 or 10,000 people on the island, right? Regarding what Erik referred to in terms of that there's a view that, you know, oh, populations are not declining and whatever on islands. Well, I can tell you that the island next door to me, the school closed down 2 years ago, and certainly the islands in Denmark, islands in Scotland, islands in France, islands certainly up in the north anyway, the populations are declining and they're facing challenges. Also, someone said about celebrating, you know, celebrating 10 years of the Lisbon Treaty, but with regards to Article 174 and how it affects, you know, mountainous and outer regions and islands and that, I don't know, is there that much to celebrate, because it's not compulsory for it to be acted on by the government. And then also, I don't want to take too much time, also regarding local development and programs like LEADER and FLAGs and all that, and I said this at a meeting in Brussels, I think about 5 years ago. Denis from Ile-de-Ponant was at the same meeting. The de minimis level is absolutely a joke, in particular because the amount of money is so small in the first place, and also then because on the islands you have such an amount of additional cost. To give one example, on my island, for me to buy a truckload of building gravel would cost, to have it landed at the bottom of my driveway will cost me €600. The same lorry load of gravel at the mainland port would cost me €150. So those are the kind of they're the kind of realities of the islands, and I know particularly the islands in the north, a lot of them are facing very, very critical situations now, and we're really hoping that something is going to happen, maybe with now that we're going into a new session, obviously, of the Parliament. We're hoping that somewhere along the line that maybe some ears will be opened up some more, and that the reality of the islands, and in particular the smaller islands, will be heard. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Martin.
Many interesting questions and many interesting points made, and we only have a few minutes to respond and to reflect to all this, since lunch is awaiting and I guess you're all hungry. I will try to do my best in a very limited time. So first of all, coming back to the questions that you have addressed, Giuseppe, at the beginning, the tools were very new. Both the ITI and the CLLD in the area of ERDF. We knew only CLLD in the area of rural development. So of course the uptake had several limitations, because as something new, people had to adjust and to learn and to experiment in this programming period. Having said that, we had already now more than 1,000 strategies implemented with the use of ITI, and more than 600 to 700 CLLDs financed by ERDF. We have another 2,300 CLLDs financed by rural development. For all of that, we will disseminate via CPMR 2 interesting websites that we have established, portals I would say, where you can find all these strategies on an interactive map. You can click, for example, on the island of Sardinia or on the island of Sicily in Crete, and you can see we have a profile for every strategy, the main lessons learned there, the main achievements, and also the contact points of colleagues who are responsible about these strategies, to whom you can address yourself in order to help each other and learn by their experience. On top of that, what we have what we call the Urban Development Network. So the colleagues, for example, from the ITI of Sardinia, they can get together with colleagues that they are implementing an ITI in Crete, for example, in Iraklio. So, and this is a framework that we finance in the European Commission in order to help the peer learning from each other and the share of experiences and the know-how. And of course, we bring experts from different members of the EU so that we can have, you know, this collective thinking and learning together. The tools are very, I think, interesting for the current political context in Europe. The citizens are asking for more participation. The citizens, either on an island or on a mountain, they think that we are taking decisions far away from them. They see Brussels very distant. They see also their national government being very distant, and sometimes they think that their regional government is also very distant, or even their mayor on their island is ignoring their choices and their voices. So I think that the tools are very important to use. We are going with them to the sub-regional level, and we can use them in a very flexible way. We can combine several funds, or we can have a mono-fund strategy. We can use them just for a deprived neighborhood, as we saw in the case of our Italian colleagues, or we can use them for a functional urban area that looks beyond the administrative borders of one city and helps also the surrounding rural areas to be integrated when it comes to transport, to provision of social services, etc. It can be 3 ITIs on an island, or an island can have only 1 ITI for the whole island. We can have a combination of the two tools. We had cases where the ITI came together with the CLLD. So the focus was a deprived area in a city, but then the managing authority launched in parallel calls via CLLD, funded by ERDF and Social Fund, asking NGOs or just groups of citizens that were active in the center of the city to take part with some actions. We had even the combination in Finland between the regional strategy there is, together with the CLLD. So all sorts of combinations are possible. We can even have an ITI between different islands. Remember the previous panel, we discussed about the biodiversity. 3-4 islands, they could combine forces in order to be able to monitor the microplastics in their surrounding area, in their archipelagos, and on top of that, they could launch CLLD in order to give money to local groups, NGOs, to do cleanup of beaches. This is possible. The other thing is that that we would like you to keep is that it can be combined also with financial instruments. It can be combined also with private investment. The money is not coming from the structural funds, it's not endless. So in order to make the maximum of that, we need to use also and to combine other sources. And this is why it's also important that we have this participatory approach, because when you embark on these strategies, it's not just the mayor with the municipal councillors deciding. You bring together the entrepreneurs, you bring together the university if you have in your island, you bring together the school teachers, you bring whomever you have who has, let's say, the willingness to help and they want to participate. And via this, many constructive things can happen. I mean, I see here the effort to create a better pedestrian passage in front of these hotels. If this was a common plan, together agreed with the hoteliers, together agreed with the local association of entrepreneurs, maybe they would like also to co-invest in that, because this is an added value, what is happening, the investment for the future of their enterprises. One thing that we saw in some of the strategies and we want to avoid in the future is that they are just a compilation of projects. That someone comes, as our colleague said, with a shopping list of things that they want to do without one interlinking with the other and without one project providing added value to the other. So if you just do, let's say, refurbishment of a square and some lighting and perhaps a cycling path, it's not an integrated strategy that long-term will give some results and will bring a benefit to the city or to the economy. You really have to think how the projects will bring long-term results. And for this, there are many good practices that we could guide you to. The other one is that the new programming period has diminished the bureaucracy and has provided more flexibility. The colleagues, again, for Sardinia, they said that it was demanding the task to allocate intermediate body status to some of their cities in order to implement the ITI. This is not anymore compulsory. So if you have a municipality with good administrative capacity, yes, you have the right and you can give them the status of intermediate body and you can delegate from the managing authority certain tasks for them to select the projects, for them to monitor the projects, to do the payments, etc. If they do not have the administrative capacity, you can opt for the simplest case, which is just to give them the right to select the projects. But then the managing authority keeps all the other, let's say, functions. What we have in the new programming period is a very favorable environment for this kind of tools. They can be used in the framework of the new cohesion policy for every of the policy objectives, either for Green Europe or for Smart Europe, etc. But there is one PO, as we said yesterday night, the Europe closer to citizens. And there are no conditionalities when it comes to the application and the use of these ITIs, because for the other POs, first, a government and a region, they have to fulfill the conditionalities that the new framework provides for. The other thing is that the governments and the regions, they have to create also an enabling environment for these tools. So if a region, I'm mentioning now, for example, let's don't put names, excludes the use of CLLD or excludes the use of certain funds from these tools, then it deprives you from certain opportunities. So this is something that you have to discuss early on with your regional governments and with your national governments. But they should give you the options so that the national programs that they will establish or the regional programs will leave the opportunity to establish multi-fund ITIs and CLLDs. The other thing is start from now preparing already for the next programming period. Don't wait. Bring together the stakeholders and start revising even your existing strategies, because what you did in one city, in one deprived neighborhood, maybe you want to expand it. Maybe you want now to target another area. But this you have to start from now. Don't wait until the legislation and the legislative package is finished. You can work in parallel, because what you need is usually time to bring together all the stakeholders and to start planning together. And this is a demanding process, because it's not in all cultures around Europe the ability to cooperate and to discuss and to mediate. In some cases it takes more effort and more time. And this is the other added value of these tools, that they are changing the mindset of how we operate and how we create participatory democracy, how we build multi-level governance. And we have heard from around of Europe of very interesting examples where mayors were saying to us in a very enthusiastic way, I have never felt better that I had the experience to work with my citizens, to work with my SMEs, or there were managing authorities from ministries that said it was the first time that we met with the regional people, we met with the municipal people on this island or on this mountain. So take the opportunity. I think it's something that we all need to foster, working together with the others, listening to the others and planning together. This is something that is of added value. And for these strategies also, it's not compulsory, but start thinking also to the future. And the future is that we need to create a more sustainable Europe, more sustainable islands. And we have the Agenda 2030. And for this, in order to be achieved, and for all these ambitious goals that we have set to ourselves as Europeans for 2030, we need to act on the local level. OECD came up recently with a study that says that 69% of the Sustainable Development Goals will not be achieved without local and regional action. For this reason, all the strategies that you will be implementing in the future, that you will be planning in the future, please try also to see which of the Sustainable Development Goals you will be influencing. There are also tools and methodology where you can try and measure and put indicators and see the difference from the baseline when you start the strategy, and after 2-3 years, how much improvement you make towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is another thing that we need to educate our citizens about the Sustainable Development Goals and what we want to achieve. Last now questions. Financial instruments, what we want to achieve. We want to help you. It's an offer, it's an open offer, as we made with the CPMR this first workshop on the ITIs and the CLLDs, and we can repeat that with more technical presentations, is to give more opportunities to the islands, to the mountains, to the sparsely populated areas to learn how they can use these tools more. Because of course other areas, they have advisors, they have more administrative capacity, is easier. For example, we have heard in the past the complaint that the new EFSI, the European Fund for Strategic Investments, is ignoring the islands. No, it's not true. There are success stories in Canary Islands with the use of EFSI. We can bundle projects together from islands and they can be bankable under the EIB. And the last one for Martin, the TIA tool, it can reach up to the point of NUTS 3. We cannot go beyond because we do not have statistical data, but we can provide, after applying this methodology, maps which can show to you scenarios in which areas we will have the biggest negative or the biggest positive, let's say, effects of a set legislative measure. And for the event that we are proposing for territorial cohesion, you will be amazed how many things the different DGs are doing for the islands. Even us, when we started doing a preliminary mapping, we were not aware that all this richness of projects, calls, and legislative measures exist. That is why we think that it's of very importance and priority to bring all this wealth to your disposal and to your knowledge. And to see also what we are missing, and perhaps we could consider extra measures.
And maybe to have a single guichet. Maybe to have a single guichet.
What can I say? We have been working together in the past on a very interesting opinion that you were the rapporteur for the Committee of the Regions on entrepreneurship on the islands. And I can only say that from this practice, you know that the doors of the Commission, they are open, and we are always willing to discuss and to hear and to learn from each other. We have our arguments, you have your arguments, but I think that always we find ways to reach via compromises good proposals. As I said twice or three times these days here, the Commission is trying to be an honest broker, but there are also a lot of interests. One member state is pulling the Commission this way and another member state that way. We try to stay somewhere impartial and in the middle. We cannot please everyone, but at least I think our intentions are honest, that we try to come with proposals that at the end they have a chance to get approved in a global compromise.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Sorry, we have no more time. Maybe during the lunch you can address and answer.
Can I just precisely on this, just one point on Martin's points, as I was directly then requested to provide some information about this why we say that dealing with islands as depopulating areas simply won't work. I think you observe it from the end of what's natural. You live on an island, you see your island depopulating, or you see you being on an island and costs 300% more to get your goods. The question is, does that call for an island policy on depopulation or an island policy on the additional cost? We need to understand the background, and it's very interesting when we analyze it European to see that if you look at a Norwegian small island will be stabilizing or growing, and the equivalent island, another part, is declining. And what is the difference? Well, partly the economy, but partly also the national policy that's making the difference. So the problem is not in saying we will make an island policy to maintain the population. We need to understand the connection with national policies of service provision, maintaining the school open. That makes the difference. And then taking it from the EU side of saying we are going to make sure that the island maintains its population is the wrong way of doing it. And that's why the logic is we need to take these things on board. And same thing on these additional costs. Why does it cost 600 euros and not 150? That's what we need to understand. Is it the question of how the transport is organized, of how the logistics are organized nationwide, regional-wise? We need to take it from that end and then understand it, because taking it from the end of the user and saying we're going to compensate the additional cost, which is the policy in the outermost regions, which I've been working on for the last year, I don't think it's an efficient way of doing things. And the outermost regions will maybe now react on Saint-Martin is present in the room, so we can have this over lunch maybe. But this way of compensating for the cost of freight to continental Europe, just because at the end of the story you realize there is an additional cost, it's a huge burden on the administration. And at the end of the day, the companies themselves say, it takes such a long time, it's so complicated that for us it's just cash. It's not making a difference in the way we operate. So we need to take a few steps back and understand what leads to these issues and how can we deal with them.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now it's over, really. So please come back at 3 o'clock. Enjoy. Thanks a lot to our speakers. Very interesting and fruitful discussion.